Okay, it is imperative that you guys wrap your heads around the process of calculating what is referred to as equivalent units. Equivalent units of production measures the work done during the period expressed in fully completed units. Okay, so let's think about this for just a second. If we are the manufacturers of Bic pens, let's say we put 1 million of them into production at the beginning of the month. On the last day of the month, at 11:59 p.m., it is quite possible that there may be hundreds of thousands of those not 100% of the way finished. However, we did finish so many during the period. What we have got to do is take the costs that have been incurred during the period, direct materials cost, direct labor cost, and manufacturing overhead cost, and assign those costs to the pens that were finished and transferred out, and also to the pens that are still in work in process. And we have got to somehow come up with a quantity in order to divide that quantity into the total cost so that we know on a per unit basis how much to assign to those that were transferred out and how much to assign to those that are still in process that have not been completed all the way. So what we have to do is calculate equivalent units. All right, so it's kind of like saying, for those units that were not all the way completed, how much or how many could we have completed 100% of the way had we concentrated all of our efforts just on how many we could have completed during the period? All right, so the second little note I have typed up for you here says that the number of 100% completed units that could have been made or processed or converted, if you will, during the period, had all of the effort been concentrated on only what could be completed the entire way, which is basically what I just tried to explain. So, for example, if at the end of the month we have still in work in process 1,000 units of widgets, Bic pens, wheels that are not 100% of the way finished. They are only 40% complete. They need 60% more labor and things put into finishing them into finished as to that distinct WIP department in order to call them done or completed. Okay, so if we were talking about the Taylor example, we had the machining department that bored and honed and machined the components of the wheel. If we're talking about them only being completed 40% of the way, then they need more boring, machining, honing. They need 60% more conversion done to them for them to be finished. In order to calculate equivalent units, we are going to take the quantity and multiply it times the percentage of conversion that it is sitting at in order to know what we would call equivalent units. So we're going to take the quantity of 1,000 and we're going to multiply that times 0.4 or 40% to give us 400 equivalent units. So in other words, equivalent units is saying, had we have focused all of our conversion efforts on a set number of units, we would have gotten 400 of them 100% of the way done. That's how you can look at equivalent units. All right, so if you need to pause it, think about it, read it, listen to me talk about it again, please do so, because this is a concept you absolutely have to get down pat. Here are a few more examples for you. Suppose you have a work-study job in the office of your college's president, and he or she asks you to compute the cost of instruction per full-time equivalent student at your college. And it is this equivalent concept that we're trying to be able to calculate a number. All right, so the college's vice president for finance provides you with the following information. The total budget or cost of instruction is $9 million. We have 900 full-time students and 1,000 part-time students. Well, how much of the instruction is going to these part-time students? Well, we would need to know about the quantity or the makeup of the hours or their usage of the instructor's time, right? So the part-time students take 60% of the classes of a full-time student during the year. So we can use this as our conversion, if you will, like in the other example. So to compute the number of full-time equivalent students per year, we would take 0.6 times 1,000, or 60% times 1,000, to get the equivalent units of part-time students, and then add it to the 900 full-time students in order to get the full-time equivalent students. So notice this is 1,500, not 1,900. It's not 900 full-time plus 1,000 part-time. We are calculating equivalent units for the part-time students and adding that to the full-time students in order to give us the full-time equivalent students. So then we could take the 9 million, we could divide it by this full-time equivalent students and get $6,000 per student. We are studying in this particular chapter the weighted average method of doing process costing. As I mentioned earlier in one of the other videos, there is also a method for first in, first out instead of FIFO. And it has several more calculations and it goes into more detail, and we can see when our costs increase or decrease over time more clearly. But we're going to keep it simple and we're going to just look at the weighted average method in this class. It considers the degree of completion or the weighting of units completed and transferred out and units still in ending work in process. We are going to have units that are not finished as of 11:59 p.m. They are only going to be completed part of the way. And so that's why we have to calculate equivalent units. Thankfully, this easier method is the most widely used method. And we do not have to consider beginning work in process in part of our computation of equivalent units. This last little line here that I just read is in reference to the fact that this is different than under the FIFO method. We literally would be looking at what was in work in process at the beginning of the period and looking at our cost over time. So we need to still calculate equivalent units of production. And I really want you guys to focus on the vocabulary of what these words mean. If you have to pause the video and think about it and then rewind and listen to me talk about it again, please do so. Okay, because the words mean something, and if you can understand it or even picture it in your mind what's going on, the better you will grasp these concepts. All right, so notice in our formula here that we have units completed and transferred out. In other words, what is the quantity or number of the units during the period that were 100% of the way completed and transferred out? Whether they got transferred into another work in process department or transferred into finished goods inventory. As to the work in process department that we are looking at, they received all of their direct materials and they received all of their conversion cost. Conversion costs are the labor and the manufacturing overhead, and they were 100% of the way completed, manufactured, or converted, however you want to think about that. Okay, that's what that part means. The next part, where we're adding to that number, we are going to add the equivalent units of ending work in process. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to get to the last date of the period. It's going to be 11:59 p.m. and there are still going to be some units still in this particular work in process department, and they are not done. They are not finished. They have not been completely converted. Therefore, we need to calculate, quote unquote, the equivalent units of them. So to calculate that part right there, you're going to take the actual quantity, the number of units still in this work in process, and you're going to multiply that times the percentage to which they have been converted this period. This number is going to be less than 100%. That's why they are still here in work in process. All right, so we've seen 40%. We've used the 60% when we talked about the equivalents for the students. You're going to get to what extent they have been converted and multiply that times the actual quantity still in work in process in order to get this equivalent units of ending work in process. All right, so these two numbers that we're adding together are our quantity, number of units, and we are going to call them the equivalent units of production. Make sure you get that little formula down pat before you proceed on in these videos. All right, so we've got an example. We've got Corey Company's packaging department during the period. They have 10,000 units that have been 100% of the way completed and transferred out. And they have 5,000 units still here in this work in process packaging department that are only 70% of the way finished, only 70% of the way converted, only 70% of the way done, only 70% of the way completed. They are not finished. We are going to take the quantity, 5,000, and multiply it times 0.7 in order to calculate the equivalent units. All right, so to total them up and get the equivalent units of production for the period for the work in process packaging department, we're going to take 10,000 units that are 100% of the way finished, that have been transferred out, and we're going to add that to 5,000 times 0.70, which gives us 3,500. Okay, so 5,000 units are still here. That's not going to change. But in helping us to assign the cost to what's going to show in the work in process packaging department per the balance sheet, we have got to calculate this number to help us figure out how much cost needs to still be attached to this particular work in process department, and then how much needs to be transferred out, possibly onto another department, another WIP department, or on to finished goods, which of course would then sooner or later become cost of goods sold. So we have to calculate equivalent units. So our total is 13,500. Make sure that you understand how this is done so that you can do it yourself on your homework and on the tests. We are going to work through an entire weighted average process costing problem in the next video. Make sure that you take really, really good notes and follow the process completely through, stopping it and rewinding it whenever necessary.